then everything would be produced from everything, and there would be no need of any thing. Clearly, the nothing out of nothing statement is here epistemically justified by the need of trackability in physical transformation. Every production requires some seed, or if you prefer, some pre-existing state of affairs out of which it comes. It is a principle of causal closure, stipulating that the universe is closed under physical causality. And I must admit that methodologically it holds. I mean, a good way, if not the best way, to study physics as a natural science is to follow the conservation principle of Lavoisier or new laws of transformations of different states. And this principle, you can phrase it and formulate in the canonic notation. For every entity, for every x comes into existence, entails that there is some y, such as x comes out of y. And x and y does not forcibly designate objects. It can be phases, processes, every kind of interaction. Well, by the way, Epicurus makes the claim that nothing becomes non-existent. The very same claim is made by Lucretius, the Roman disciple of Epicurus, in his didactic poem. And here he makes clear that the principle of physical closure is directed against every divine interference. Nothing is ever divinely generated from nothing, he says. Well, this is a good requirement for physics. Creation out of nothing and annihilation are not acceptable in the framework of natural sciences. And I will add that even in contemporary physics, according to the theories of second quantizations, when you talk of creation or of annihilation of particles, you have to track transformations of state of affairs, collisions between photons or particles and antiparticles. It is not from scratch. No physics would be possible when changes of states of affairs would not be trackable and accountable at all. There must exist preceding or relating states of affairs and laws of change, even if the laws are statistical and not deterministic and so on. Well, let's come back to Epicurus. He is making a further statement. He applied the principle of physical closure under causality to the sum of things as a collective entity, pan, and not only distributively to every component of it. Any change of the sum total of things would imply something else into which it could change, or something outside which could bring about change. Change of the rule implies exteriority or boundary or limit, and by its very definition, there is nothing outside the sum total of things, and nothing else than everything that there is. This principle of closure under causality leads to something like a steady state theory of the universe, but of course this is anachronical. And then, as you know, atoms enter the scene. It's important to know that the atomic theory is only a way of instantiating the principle nothing comes out of nothing. Epicurus begins with the principles, and then you have the casting. So let's now briefly consider the commitment to atomism. Epicurus asserts the existence of indivisible and immutable bodily elements. This assertion does not rely on any observational evidence at this time. He is suggesting an explanation of physical transformations in terms of combination and dissolution. And of course, such an explanation dismisses creation out of nothing and annihilation. And I would say, okay, as a natural scientist, he deals with a set of fundamental entities or particles that must underlie every physical transformation. Of course, the list of fundamental particles can be revised, and such particle will sooner or later reveal to be the compound or the outcome of some interaction or antithesis or processes. But this way of explaining changes as combinations of elements has proved to be successful. Surely, if there is nothing but atoms and void, there is no other state of affairs from which it could come, nor in which it could turn into. Methodologically, it leads to a materialistic monism. And then Epicurus makes another claim about boundlessness or infinity of the universe. Till now, the universe could be finite. Let's try to go through the argument. There is nothing else than the universe. Therefore, it has no relationship to anything else. What has no relation to anything else has no extremity or no boundary. Therefore, the universe is infinite. Of course, the presupposition here is that the finite universe would have to be limited by something else. Of course, at least since Bernard Riemann and his spherical geometry, we can conceive of an unlimited and nevertheless finite universe. But it's not the point. It's pointless to criticize Epicurus for not having anticipated non-Euclidean geometries. Because the main point is the following. Physically, the universe, be it finite or infinite, does not stand in relation to anything else. This is the deep meaning of boundlessness. Again, this closure of the universe under physical causality is a good methodological rule. As a physicist, Epicurus is right. But as a metaphysician, that's the question. And there is an issue as to whether sometimes Epicurus makes a step outside physics in order to impose a kind of naturalistic metaphysics. Any foreign intervention has been precluded by the special boundlessness of the universe, but now Epicurus is requiring temporal boundlessness. Atoms and void are endowed with everlasting existence. But if they have no physical beginning, does it entail that they are self-existent? That would be the step from physics to metaphysics. Does the spatial temporal boundlessness of the universe rule out the possibility of its metaphysical creation? More on this later. But this is a question of the shift from physics to metaphysics. Are we justified in saying that those elements are the ultimate and self-existence building blocks of the universe? This is the no boundary, no creation inference that, in my view, can be challenged. Now to the second part, I'd like to evoke some echoes from ancient Greek materialism and the revival of this inference, no boundary, no creator. There is a claim that eternity of the universe entails atheism. It is a claim that boundlessness precludes any supernatural cause, whereas boundary of the universe would require a creature. I will try to fight against this double inference. I will first illustrate my comments upon the presupposition that eternity entails atheism. In the sources of contemporary philosophy, the presupposition that eternity of the world entails atheism is to be found in Engel's philosophy of nature. In this essay dedicated to Ludwig Feuerbach, Engels formulates the paramount questions of rule of philosophy. It's a very solemnous statement. The paramount question of the rule of philosophy is which is primary, was ist das ursprüngliche, spirit or nature, Geist oder Natur. And this distinction is immediately translated into an alternative. Did God create the world, or has the world been in existence eternally? And it sounds very clear. The alternative seems to be fair. Die Welt erschaffen oder ist die Welt von Ewigkeit da? Engels phrases a strict alternative is implying that eternal existence precludes ontological dependence. That's my point, and I do wish to contest this inference. By the way, Engels has campaigned against the idea of an evolutionary universe. He was shocked by the discoveries of thermodynamics or applied to the universe. But this is another topic, and I would like to say that the big fear of Engels that the universe could have a beginning is pointless for the metaphysical issue. The universe could be endowed with a natural beginning. And you have to make further steps in order to infer a supernatural creation from a natural beginning. More on this later. Well, there are many philosophers and scientists who try to campaign against the revival of the theory of creation. For example, Ludwig Platte, he intended to revive the causal closure of the universe, but not only as a methodological rule, but as a metaphysical axiom. He wanted to provide an argument against creation of matter, and as he puts it, matter exists, nothing proceeds from nothing, in consequence, matter is eternal, and, as a conclusion, we cannot admit the creation of matter. Well, I would like to say that there is something valuable in Plate's argument. For no scientific theory is in a position to track back the origin of matter from nothing physically. Why? Just because there is no serious physical theory that can deal with absolute nothingness. You can deal with a quantum void and so on, but absolute nothingness cannot be an object of science. It is the non-object par excellence. I would say, in a sense, epistemically, matter is eternal, but that only means that, physically speaking, we will always deal with matter or energy or fields or cores or whatsoever. But the assertion that matter is metaphysically eternal is questionable. The most we can say is, absolutely speaking, we do not know. The statement 3 is dubious. And anyway, even if the third statement were justified, the statement 4 does not follow from 3. Or it would follow from it only on the presupposition of a certain account of creation. Well, let's come to the late USSR, where Andrei Zhdanov used to condemn all theories of Big Bang theories by saying that Big Bang theory was reinforcing religious opinions on the structure of the universe and was bringing back to life the fairy tale according to which the world came out of nothing. So he considered that creation out of nothing and nothing comes out of nothing were in conflict. I will try to show that those are two separate topics. It's not worthy that Zhdanov makes the same statement as Plate or Engels. A finite universe gives primacy to spiritualism, whereas a boundless universe is evidence for materialism. Curiously enough, we find in contemporary cosmology a similar antipathy against boundaries. And the exciting reason for this antipathy is that it would be legitimate to infer God's existence from those singularities at which the laws of science break down. Hawking seems to imply that any boundary or edge of space-time would be crying out for a divine intervention. Since he does not favor that, Hawking welcomes what he terms a new possibility, opened up by the quantum theory of gravity, in which there would be no boundary to space-time, and so there would be no need to specify the behavior at the boundary. As he puts it, there would be no singularities at which the laws of science broke down, and no edge of space-time at which one would have to appeal to God or some new law to set the boundary condition for space-time. This is one of his most famous claims in his famous brief history of time. One could say the boundary condition of the universe is that it has no boundary. And here, seems to me, there is a shift from physics to metaphysics. The universe would be completely self-contained and not affected by anything outside itself. You see, it's exactly the same kind of statement that you find in Epicurus. It would neither be created nor destroyed, it would just be calculated. This is the famous no boundary condition, elaborated by Stephen Hawking and Jim Harter. I will not enter a discussion as to which extent the no boundary model holds. As a philosopher, it is not my job, but I am considering the concept of being self-contained and not affected by anything outside itself. Once again, as a principle of epistemology of physics, it is absolutely correct. I will never recommend to a physicist to make intervene the divine will in his equation. Okay. As we have seen, if the universe is, in the sense of Epicurus, the total sum of physically relevant processes, structures and entities, it is not affected by anything outside itself. And we know of no physical process that could create or destroy it. But does it imply that the universe is a necessary being, that it would just be? I do not think so. Let's focus on Hawking's line of reasoning. Hawking proceeds to contrast the traditional Newtonian picture of God winding up the clockwork of the universe and setting up the initial conditions, with the new picture of his cosmological model where the universe is devoid of any kind of edge, boundary or limit and has no initial conditions. Once again, I have nothing against the no boundary conditions as a physical model. I'm not competent. But I suspect that Hawking translates into a metaphysical statement this no boundary condition. He writes, so long as the universe had a beginning, we could suppose it had a creature. But if the universe is really completely self-contained, having no boundary or edge, it would have neither beginning nor end, it would simply be. What place then for a creature? Seems to me here lurks a presupposition. The presupposition is that the beginning is a necessary condition for supposing a creature. You cannot suppose a creature unless the universe has a beginning. So creation entails beginning as a necessary condition, temporal boundary. And the contraposition gives no boundary, no beginning, no place for a creator. I just like to stress the point that getting rid of singularities at all costs is a useless precaution against theistic metaphysics. For first, when studying physics, you should never appeal to God, for God is not the concept of physics. And when studying physics, you are not dealing with supernatural powers or superevidence of the universe. So no physical conclusions can be taken in favor of the existence or as a disproof of the existence of God. And second, the inference from a boundary to a creature is not valid. In fact, two kinds of boundaries have to be distinguished. What we should call an epistemic boundary, an internal affair to physics, and a metaphysic boundary. I do not pretend to be a better cosmologist than the late Professor Hawking. I do not even pretend to be a better metaphysician, since, as we shall see later, Hawking himself acknowledges that the inference from physical self-containment to metaphysical self-existence is false, but this acknowledgement has not been retained by the posterity. Well, meanwhile, I'd like to inquire into whether the principle ex nihilo nihil fit, nothing comes out of nothing, defeats or not the metaphysical assertion of a creation out of nothing. Let's consider again the first principle of Epicurean physics, out nothing of nothing, is nicht presquoted. Does it preclude or defeat, as often claimed, the theistic conception, the metaphysical conception of creation out of nothing? Let's consider the point. Let us first phrase more precisely the first Epicurean principle, which, as suggests to express positively, for every entity x coming into existence, entails there is a y, such as x comes out or comes from y. Let's define the creative operation as follows. C creates y, means C makes x come into existence. Now what about creation out of nothing? C creates x out of nothing. C means C makes x come into existence out of nothing. But here, there is a crucial issue as regards the scope of the phrase out of nothing. Does it qualify the coming into existence or the making of the existence? On the first interpretation, where out of nothing is in the scope of x comes into existence, you would have C brings about that x coming into existence out of nothing, which clearly contradicts the principle nothing comes out of nothing. But another interpretation is available. It amounts to considering that the phrase out of nothing does not qualify the coming into existence of x as a transitional process, as if you could say that those glasses were nothing before they come into being, which is absurd, physically and metaphysically. But you could say that the out of nothingness is applied to the creator and not to the way of evolving on the side of the creature. So C, out of nothing, not out of some pre-existent entity, brings about that x comes into existence, or that there is an x with such and such properties. And so the x that comes into existence due to the action of the creator, not out of some pre-existent entity, this x could still remain physically subject to the Epicurean principle. We have to disintegrate physics from ethics. To put it otherwise, the issue of epistemic locability can and must be disentangled from the issue of ontological dependence. We have then to disintegrate the two concepts of creation. Following the first view, God makes something that exists out of nothing. God brings about that something comes into being out of nothing. It is a contradiction. But this is a transitional concept, which is a feeble concept of creation. Once upon a time, God took nothing as a matter and transformed this nothing into something, which is absurd. But of course, you have an alternative, because nothing cannot be transformed into whatsoever. Nothing can ever happen to nothing, for nothing is not a subject matter at all. The making of something out of nothing, the transformation of nothingness into being, this is a mistaken and misleading account of creation due to the narrative constraints when you are to explain or to try to understand where all comes from. That well, once there was nothing, then there was something. But if there is really nothing at all, there is no time. There is no temporal metric. So you can't even think of transition between nothingness and some being. But another concept of creation is available, the concept of ontological dependence of what there is upon the creative principle. Following this view, the existence of whatever depends on God. And on this account, creation is not a physical operation. It is not a transition, neither physical nor metaphysical, from nothingness to being. Nothing happens to nothingness, which would become something. It is not the trouble of anything from nowhere to somewhere, the absolute coming to be is not a becoming, it is not a physical production, it's not even a temporal process. It is a relation of ontological dependence between what there is and its eventual supernatural source, which doesn't proceed physically. Just a remark on exegesis. The second book of Maccabees presents the statement, it is not out of existent beings that God created this world. And the literal translation ought to have been non ex aliquibus quae Deus, which is perfectly respectful as regards the Epicurean principle. But the translation was more rhetoric, ex nihilo fecit illa Deus, as if the book which was written in Greek, and the second book of Maccabees, was bearing et meant. Well, and well, it's already half an hour that I'm speaking. I will certainly not have time to end my paper. Don't worry. I'd like to stress what I call now for part the true state of the question. It has been already noticed by some Neoplatonist philosophers, and also during the 17th and then the beginning of the 18th century, that the true opposition between atheism and theism is not the age of the universe. As Samuel Clarke, a disciple of Newton, puts it, the question between us and the atheists is not whether the world can possibly have been eternal, but whether it can possibly be the original, independent, and self-existing being, which is a very different question for many who have affirmed the one, have still utterly denied the other. And it seems that we have completely forgotten this wise statement that, metaphysically speaking, the duration a parte ante of the universe is not relevant for atheism or theism. So the true picture is not a position between eternal atheistic universe and the temporally finite theistic universe. You are at least 3 or maybe even 4 possibilities. The universe has a duration, either it is everlasting or it is finite in time. And metaphysically, it is self-existent or it owes its existence to a cause. You can conceive of an everlasting and self-existent universe. This is the universe of Epicurus, Lucretius, but also of Spinoza. He always existed on its own. You can easily conceive of a universe that is finite in time but owes its existence to a cause. He was created at some point or at the beginning of time. And that is to be found in Plato, Augustine, and others. But even Plato and Augustine are dubious about the meaning of the very notion of a beginning of time. If you speak of a beginning of time, you should know when does time mean. Okay. Time could be just a relational property between events. So if you have no event, you have no time. You have a third possibility, an everlasting universe, which is the everlasting effect of a timeless or everlasting God. And Neoplatonists, Avicenna, the rest, even Aquinas, although as a Christian he acknowledges that the world has been created in time, but he says that according to the criteria of reason, you have no proof of the finite duration of the world. It could have been created eternally. Okay. And there are many comparisons. I will give those of this of Leibniz that, for example, they use some Neoplatonists used to say, well, imagine the reflection of a branch of tree in the lake, well, the reflection on the mirror or on the lake is the effect, but it is simultaneous. So if you imagine an eternal tree upon an eternal lake, the cause will be simultaneous with the effect, and both will be everlasting. So there is no contradiction between being everlasting and owing its essential cause. And I skip to a more interesting comparison made by Leibniz. He compares the universe with a book everlastingly compiled. Let's imagine that the book of the elements of geometry has always existed. One always compiled from another. It's evident that even if a reason can be given for the present book from past one, from which it was compiled, nevertheless, we shall never come upon a full reason, no matter how many past books we assume, and eventually an infinite quantity of books, since we would always be right to wonder why such books have existed from all time, why books existed at all, and why they were written in this way. What is true of books is also true of the different states of the world. For a subsequent state is in a way compiled from the preceding one, although according to certain laws of change. And so, however far back you go to the earlier states, you will never find in those states a full reason why there should be any world rather than one that's unknown, and why it should be such as it is. This is what we call the cosmological argument, and it has nothing to do with cosmology, of Big Bang or of the eternal universe. And Leibniz concludes, therefore, even if you should imagine the world eternal, because you still suppose only a succession of states, and because you will not find a sufficient reason in any of them, and indeed, no matter how many states you assume, you will not make the least progress towards giving a reason. It's evident that the reason must be sought elsewhere. And you know, this elsewhereness is the expression of metaphysical boundary. But metaphysical boundary by an external cause is compatible with no boundary in the course of physical states of affairs. So we have two different issues. When we explain each state of affairs distributively within our observable universe, with physical laws, processes and entities, well, this is a distributive explanation. For every state of affairs, Sn, there is at least one or more preceding state of affairs, such as the conjunction of this preceding state of affairs and the laws of nature entails the occurrence of this state of affairs. This is the theory of the entropy. Okay. But searching a collective unitary explanation as to why states of affairs have existed, it is a metaphysical question, and then you have a quantifier shift. It is not for every state of affairs, but there is an A, an alpha, if you prefer, such as for every state of affairs, A is not the causal physical antecedent, but A might be the best explanation as to why exists every state of affairs and even the laws of nature. I'd like to end with a confession made by Stephen Hawking himself. Because Hawking has been heralded as a great atheist thinker, who is freeing modern and postmodern humanity from superstition, but himself writes that we are not allowed to make the step from theory to metaphysics, from physical theory to metaphysical issues. Even if there is only one possible unified theory, it is just a set of rules and equations. What is it that breathes fire into the equations and makes the universe for them to describe? It is quite the same question as with Leibniz. You might explain every state of affair with laws of physical change, but you have not explained why there are states of affairs at all and why laws operate. Okay? And as he puts it, once again, Why does the universe go toward the bother of existing? Is the unified theory so compelling that it brings about its own existence? It would be foolish to say that the theory brings about the existence of the universe. Or does it need a creature? And if so, does he have any other effect on the universe? Okay. Back to metaphysical questions. And Shokhin himself acknowledged that the temporal parameter on the question of the spatio-temporal boundary of the universe is neutral. In another paper, The Origin of the Universe, he writes, does it require creature to decree how the universe began? Or is the initial state of the universe determined by a law of science? In fact, this question would arise even if the histories of the universe went back to the infinite past. Well, I'm now going to skip the end of my paper. I would have advocated the metaphysical neutrality of Big Bang. I would pay tribute to Alexander Fliman. Just one defect, he's a great founder of the Big Bang theory, and Lemaitre, Robertson, and Walker still refer to him as the creator of the theory, but he made something, seems to me, a mistake of metaphysical interpretation. He spoke in his article of 1922 of mirozdanie, in the sense of sozdanie mira, creation of the world. That's as Lemaitre has really good advocated the point. Well, you will find it on the paper. There are two concepts of beginning, physical beginning and supernatural beginning. And you have a very nice argumentation by Lemaitre that you can conceive from the quantic theory and from the relativistic theory a physical, a natural beginning of the universe that does not preclude the problem of physics. Such a theory stays completely out of every metaphysical or religious issue. The materialist remains free to deny any transcendent being. The problem of creation would be completely disentangled from that of cosmology. But Lemaitre is not skeptic. As a metaphysician, he is pleased that he considers, just like Leibniz, that the question as to whether the universe owes its existence to a supernatural cause has nothing to do with the issue as to whether the duration of the universe is finite or not, or if the metric of the universe is illimited and finite or not. Those are technical matters, fascinating for the physicist, but not relevant for metaphysics. The problem of creation retains its complete metaphysical meaning, the meaning of the dependence of every being of ourselves. And this is the second concept of creation that I alluded to before, the concept of ontological dependence, which is not a concept of the so-called transformation of nothingness into being. But well, just the last word to Maxwell, who used to say, science is incompetent to reason upon creation of matter itself of nothing. It should be self-evident that no science, which deals with natural entities, can pretend to deliver a disproof of supernatural being. You just can say, well, I do not need God in my equations, and I would like to answer, fortunately, because if you introduce God in your equations, which is the mass, the velocity of God, what is a spatio-temporal structure, and so on, which is absurd. Okay. And nevertheless, in the very same lecture in Bradford in 1873, Maxwell provides a metaphysical argument from the regularity of the world to the existence of creature. But as he emphasized, it is not a physical state. Thank you.
So, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your excellent talk. And now, please, time for questions or comments. So, Veronica, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was very interesting. Three questions actually, I put them short. Would you say that the principle nothing comes out of nothing is a type of the principle of sufficient reason, as Leibniz said? And if so, or even if it's not, is there sufficient reason to think that this principle is true? Nothing comes out of nothing, and the principle of sufficient reason, because it's debated if we have sufficient reasons to think that it's true, it's commonly assumed. And the third, have I understood you rightly that the theory of causal closure is a metaphysical claim, so that we have no scientific reasons or evidence to show that it's true or false, but that many scientists take this assumption and treat it as if it would be a scientific claim, but it's in a metaphysical claim.
Yes. Concerning the second question, it depends on what you mean with theory of causal closure. If you stick to a methodological rule not to introduce in your field of research non-identified entities or entities whose description does not imply physical parameters, observational or theoretical, well, it is not metaphysical. It is the way of living. It is a modus vivendi of every science. It is just like not introducing psychology in mathematics. So, the scope of this principle of causal closure can be interpreted as just a methodological rule. But of course, it has sometimes been, and it is something that Epicurus and others are suggesting, as a metaphysical claim. As such, it has to be discussed in metaphysics, and the fact that it is successful as a rule or methodology does not prove that it holds as metaphysical claim. As regards your first question, I would like to make the same kind of reply. Nothing out of nothing. What would you say if, when you have to account for a phenomenon, be it in sociology or in physics, you say, okay, there is no origin, but I have a good theory, it supervenes from nowhere. No. It's better to say, I have no explanation. But having no explanation doesn't entail the explanation is it comes from nothing. And as regards the relationship between nothing out of nothing and the principle of sufficient reason, it is a very complicated discussion because there are many forms of the principle of sufficient reason. Alexander has invented a weak version and a statistical version of the principle. So I would like to say the principle of sufficient reason can operate as an ideal in science. It can also operate, but with different entities and different characterization of what there is in metaphysics. And so I prefer to disentangle the applications of this principle instead of mingling them together. And it seems to me that it is the problem. That would be my conclusion. No, I don't think it. This is my plea for the disentangling of physical cosmogony and metaphysical creation. And in both, you can let operate nothing out of nothing or the principle of sufficient reason. You could say, for example, that in the metaphysical statement that the world owes its existence to God, well, the world is not out of nothing. It is somehow from or out of God, but not in the physical sense. If it is in the physical sense, you got pantheism. Okay. But its existence is due to God. So we have a causal antecedent. But this causal atheism does not function like the law of gravitation operates on a mass. Yes, it is.
Yes, well, it has to do with Hawkins, and it's, of course, I like what you're saying very much, so it's very good. But I was just wondering, how would you interpret this inconsistency in Hawkins' writing then? Would you say that his anti-theistic claims are just for selling copies, or is it reflecting his atheism? Which one would you...
He had himself given an interview in saying, people have made, how can you say that you have a disproof of God's existence? He said, I would not sell so many copies if I would hear out that the new quantum theory has no consequence on the issue as to whether God's existence or not. It is an editorial problem. That's all. It's not inconsistency. But you know, someone like Hawking has been much instrumentalized by the media, of course, of his own state, by a fool, a victim of an accident, and nevertheless is the best cosmologist, which is not fortunately the case. You know, the scientific community says, well, he's a good cosmologist, but he's not the only one.
Has he given any reason for his atheism somewhere else?
Well, he plays with the idea, it seems to me. Once he writes, the reason why there is an universe is the law of gravity. The law of gravitation makes the universe exist. But this is absurd. A law, in order to operate, needs a field of object to which it is submitted. So it's a way of speaking. And it makes copy solve. But if you read much of his serious conferences, he will rarely make such advertisements against metaphysical theism.
So please, next question. No one? So,
we're convinced.
I have some questions. We have 10 minutes because we started later. And maybe one short linguistical comment on the paper. You used the word mirazdanie, but I didn't understand it clearly. Do you mean that mirazdanie by itself means erschaffung der Welt? Or not? Because the word mirazdanie is just the world. So in Russia, it's
yes.
building
Creature.
It's not so much. It's
the sum of the creature.
Yeah, it's like an English creation. Creatures, but creatures. You see, creatures, it doesn't mean that there's a creator. It's because there is no misunderstanding. And another question is about why you didn't speak anything about Aristotle, because it's a very interesting figure in his debate. He believed that the world is temporarily infinite and especially finite or bounded. Yeah, and he believed that both are necessary to be the first cause. Maybe it's not creator.
Yes, that's the point.
But it's something supernatural.
Yes.
In clearly way because it's mind and so on, life and so on. Yeah? So, but you don't introduce his views in the discussion, and I just wondering why. And the very last question. The very last question is I forgot. So okay, then it's enough. Yes.
Well, so as regards Friedman, as you know, I know no Russian words. I just try to get some information. But the fact is that in the German text you find Erschaffener.
So maybe it's
Das ist, es ist nicht, it is not exactly Schöpfungner, aber was denken Sie? Erschaffen, das ist ein...
But if there is a translation for Mirazdanya, it's just
Okay.
that's wrong.
Okay.
I think maybe I'm wrong too.
But well, that is
universe.
It's universal.
Yes, but
Not necessarily creation.
it comes with the discovery of the expansion of the universe, and we should read again the paper. Einstein has campaigned against that. He has first criticized the calculation of Feynman. He said it's impossible that you find a universe in expansion because this is a religious presupposition. But Einstein was honest, and he had to acknowledge that the calculations of Feynman were perfectly right. He apologized, and then Feynman could die in peace. Nevertheless, Einstein still resisted the religious interpretation, the metaphysical and revelation. Well, as regards the second question, why did not I mention Aristotle? It is true that Aristotle maintained that the duration of the universe is infinite, a parte ante and a parte post, okay? And he nevertheless considers that at the summit of the world there is a prime mover, but which is not a physical causal agent, it is really a metaphysical agent. But this mover ignores the existence of the world. He is just desired, it's just a model of self-contemplation that every natural being tries to imitate. He is the telos of the universe, but it is not the efficient cause of the universe. So, it is not a creature. And my point was, it isn't under the metaphysics of creation, causal dependency of the universe on God, and the problem of the age of the universe. That's why I did not mention Aristotle.
So, thank you so much for your So, now we have our last presenter. It is Professor Weidner Shokhin from Institute of Philosophy in Moscow, and his talk is Early Advaita Vedanta contra Indian atheism. He's all welcome.
My talk is very specific. I'll be short. In Western civilization, atheism has been up to this time vexing and powerful opposition to religious and idealistic thought, to which the latter had to respond continually and with mixed success. Looked on as a whole, Western atheistic tradition has reproduced and elaborated still antique patterns of unmasking religion, and even developed the paradoxical pattern of atheistic fideism that goes back to Roman Epicureanism, emerged later in the French Revolution, and Comte positivistic church, blossoms in the communist ideology in the Soviet Union, and manifests itself even as the so-called neo-atheism of Richard Dawkins and other horsemen of apocalypse. Nothing of such kind of influence on society has enjoyed atheism in India, to such an extent that there were notorious indologists who even expressed a doubt as to the very existence of this trend of thought in the South Asia. Among other things, they refer to the lack of survival of atheistic texts which could pretend at any ancestry. This is true, but I believe the main reason was not their non-existence or their utter destruction by the numerous opponents of materialism, but more likely, I can refer here to an opinion of the eminent Indologist of the 20th century, Faul, that only those texts have survived whose rewriting was more or less of prestige, while in a civilization absolutely dominated by religious world outlook in numerous verities, such rewriting could be fraught of great dishonesty in the public opinion, to say the least. It seems that adaptive value of Indian atheism was roughly this. In the middle of the first millennium before Christ, in the era of flourishing of the trends of thought opposite to Brahmanism and the birth of philosophy itself in the proper sense, it was one of several more or less influential factions. The earliest Buddhist texts of the Pali Canon refer to some of its leaders, with Ajita Kesakambala at their head, deriding the Orthodox religion, its practices and officials, because of their belief in the non-existence of any immaterial things, heaven, hell, and correspondingly the means for acquisition of a good afterlife and avoidance of a bad one. Some Buddhist suttas, corroborated also by some giant sources, make one sure that this nihilism had some circulation among the highest aristocracy of North India, confer narratives about the great Signor Paisi, who set up experiments with his prisoners to learn whether they have also the soul besides their corporeal parts. In the first half of the first millennium AD, we have evidence on the further development of Indian atheism, which seemed to constitute already a philosophical school. These philosophers began to be entitled the Lokayatikas, formerly mere experts in controversies, trained in substantiation and repudiation of any philosophical tenets, very similar to Greek sophists, were known under this name. Charvakas, from the name of the demon Charvaka, and followers of some mythical sage Brihaspati, a teacher of politics with some features of Machiavellianism, to whom even fabulous sutras were ascribed. According to the didactic sections of the great epos Mahabharata, these Indian new atheists tried to found their main doctrine. It is repudiation of the existence of the substantial soul beside the body, endowed with contingent consciousness, on the epistemological doctrine of sense perception as the only valid source of human knowledge, in opposition to other philosophical schools, which added logical inference, testimony of sacred texts, and some other to it. And there are clear indications that the composers of some Brahmanic sutras, it is basic texts of schools, wherein crucial short propositions framing their main points were expounded, alluded to their main doctrine. Now, in the second half of the first millennium AD, commentators of these basic texts were trying to disprove this doctrine by means of various arguments and responding to counter-arguments offered by atheists, wherefrom some seem to be real pleas of the Chervakas Lokayatsikas, and some coined by their adversaries. The last point is of crucial importance. It makes one sure that scholastic method of exposition of philosophical issues, when not only actual but also generalized opponents were opposed, to show that a proponent's doctrine was completely and from every side preferable to one of opponents, was by no means on their Western heritage, but constituted an intercultural format of analytic philosophizing. Anyway, Indian atheism seemed still alive also in this period, inasmuch as the very stance of polemics with it expressed an alive dialogue. But the same controversial dialogue in the text dating from circa the 10th century AD leaves impression that atheism had already remained only in stock rooms of leading philosophical schools as a monument of overcoming their former rivals. One of the most impressive of these battles was the dialogue, or these living battles, I stress it, and not memorial, was the dialogue between a generalized Lokayatsika and the dancing in the famous Shankara's Brahma Sutra Bhashya from the 7th to 8th centuries AD. In the Brahma Sutras themselves, most likely not earlier than the 3rd century AD, they have only very scanty evidence on this opposition. It is atheist thesis that Atman, that the spiritual principle, doesn't exist separately inasmuch as it cannot be perceived where there is no body, and the response that there is not inseparability between them inasmuch as one can exist without another and vice versa. Shankara unrolls arguments of both sides as they were implemented in real polemics. According to the Lokayatsikas, although consciousness is not observable in the four natural elements, the earth, water, wind, fire, is single or combined, yet it can appear when these are transformed into the shape of a human body in a manner similar to a rising of new intoxicating power when some ingredients lacking it in it are combined in some proportion. Judging by other texts of the same epoch, it was a stock atheist argument from analogy. On the other hand, when A, it is the self exists only when B, it is the body, exists and doesn't exist when B is lacking, a conclusion is unavoidable that A is merely a quality or function of B, and in such a way life, movements, consciousness, memory, and other psychical and mental phenomena observed only in living bodies and not without them proved to be only the body's attributes. The upshot is that there is no Atman separate from the body, and in reality it is only a human body endowed with specific qualities. Such was Shankara's presentation of the atheistic main doctrine. To this, the founder of Advaita Vedanta opposes a set of arguments. The first, the very attributes of two substances are very different in their nature. In contrast to such attributes of the body as color, form, etc., thinking or memory cannot be perceived from the outside, and to say more, are unperceivable in principle. The second argument, we are conscious of the components of the body, but had consciousness been their attribute, this would have been impossible, as it is impossible for fire to burn itself, or for a dancer to ride on his own shoulder. The third one, in contrast to corporeal components, which are subject to everlasting change, the self is invariably identical to itself, and common experience confirms this when one says, example given, "This is I who have seen this or that." The fourth one, from the fact that consciousness occurs when the body is present, it doesn't follow that it is an attribute of the latter, just as also visual perception occurs when daylight is present. It doesn't follow that perception should be an attribute of light itself. And the fifth one, consciousness can take place even when the body is absent, as in the state of deep sleep, and here senseless body is considered as the lack of the body. Other Shankara's arguments from other texts ascribed to him may be considered elaborations of the aforesaid. For example, in the Prashnopanishad Bhashya, having listed the main attributes of Atman as contrary to those of the body, it is properties of consciousness, invariability, purity, and thoughtlessness, he underlines that objects of perception depend on consciousness for their existence, just as color depends on the capacity of seeing for its manifestation. In the commentary to the Brihadaranyaka, which is ascribed to Shankara with much confidence, an argument is offered that we can see in slumber what we see and not other things, only because of the continuity of consciousness as radically different from fluctuations of corporeal particles. He also stresses here that even a dead body must be seen by the opponent as conscious, inasmuch as a needful combination of material elements is present also there. The latter argument is reproduced also in the commentary on this Shankara's text by his disciple Sureshvara, named the Brihadaranyaka Bhashya. Let us come to some conclusions. In contrast to such an important argument of the philosophers of Western modernity, or defended mind-body dualism, let's take, for example, Christian Wolff, Hermann Reimarus, Moses Mendelssohn, because of incompatibility between the simplicity of the soul and composition of the body, Shankara and his followers emphasized another ontological contrast between them. It is that the subject of experience cannot be placed at the same level of reality with its objects, including the corporeal locus of the subject itself. And this ontological gap provides the necessary condition for every experience. In other words, if we acknowledge that any cognitive experience takes place, and we do acknowledge it, consciousness cannot be regarded as an attribute of the body. This way of reasoning seems relevant also for today's dualist arguments against mind-body physicalism, which is one of the cornerstones of atheism, as negation of afterlife, inasmuch as the soul is regarded on the function of the body, as was the case with the Indian atheists. It is true that some Advaitic reasons proved naive. Among them such a plea that even a dead body should be conscious if we embrace the materialistic viewpoint. Nevertheless, Shankara's very graphic argument concerning the inability of fire to burn itself and the dancer's incapability to ride on his shoulder, reminding one of controversial examples offered in another context by Buddhist dialecticians of Madhyamaka school, belongs to the golden resources of intercultural mind-body dualism. The same is true also of his reasoning that from the statement an essence X with attributes A, B, C, etc. correlates with an essence Y with contrary attributes and even coexists with the latter, in no way can be inferred proposition that X should be regarded as an attribute of Y. The brilliant example with the capability of seeing and daylight as only an outward condition of its functioning hits the target of physicalism faultlessly, and in combination with undoubtful elements of transcendental ontology in the Kantian sense, it is reasoning on how any cognitive experience can be possible in principle, and which conditions are necessary for that, give us a good cumulative proof. And Daniel Dennett's consciousness explained is justifiably called sometimes consciousness explained away. And that contemporary evolutionary physicalism requires much more numerous unobvious prepositions than a philosophy pretending to scientism may afford. Thank you.
Thank you. Please now it's time for questions.
Would you say there's always a very strong connection between atheism and the rejection of some form of existence of the soul or dualism? Because someone could also say, well, I'm an atheist, I don't believe that God exists, but I'm a dualist. Right? Like if you take some kind of Platonic philosophy, then you might say, well, there are just by nature souls are immaterial and they are existing eternally, but there is no God. There are just souls and the world, but there is no God existing.
Yeah, you're right. For example, there was a very old and influential school of Indian philosophy just called Sankhya, that professed something like an atheistic dualism. That is right. But my idea is that if we have the whole structure of atheistic worldview, then physicalism is a necessary component of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so, but what about, I mean, another way of phrasing that is to think about it in connection to reincarnation. So you might, whether you believe in gods or not, if you believe in reincarnation, you might have to have a dualistic understanding of the self to justify the ideas about reincarnation. Is there any kind of connection of that sort in the literature? Or is this reincarnation thoughts on that is not relevant for the issue?
I'm not sure that I caught your question.
Well, whether there is any God or gods.
Yeah.
If you're thinking that an afterlife is in terms of reincarnation, that you get.
You say afterlife, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now I understand this
okay. Yeah. So that's what I was thinking, that to have a kind of reincarnation coming back again and again and again, that could be a reason to argue why you need the body self dualism, so to say. So I was just wondering whether that is an element that is part of this discussion that you're not addressing. I mean, in a different understanding of life after death.
Yes, I see some similarities between your and God's question, yes. Then I understand you that reincarnation is again a dualist doctrine, and that is true, but it had nothing to do with theism. Yes?
Okay.
Yes, it's true. Indian theism was very specific. It is something like today's open theism. It is confined theism. They acknowledged the main divine attributes, omniscience, yes, benevolence, but they negated divine omnipotence, because in reality, God in Indian philosophical systems, it is called Ishvara, is only a manager and not a creator of this beginningless mechanism of reincarnations, which is, from the ontological point of view, is quite independent of him. God's task in this confined theism is only to connect former acts of a being, of a person, and further retribution for this, be it good retribution or bad retribution. But he is not a creator of this law of retribution itself. You're right. Mm-hmm.
Please, any questions? More questions?
So it is, I mean, it's not a topic I know much about at all, so I can just ask.
Maybe you have some questions.
But do you? Yeah, go ahead, brother.
Maybe I have some understanding question. Did I really understand that in Indian philosophy the mind-body dualism was not the Cartesian dualism?
Yeah.
So self was a higher principle than body, also asymmetrical form. Did I get it right? It's
Yeah. The truth is that there were many Indian mind-body dualism. This tradition is exceedingly rich in every regard. For example, the classical dualism of the Sankhya school is not the same as that is true Cartesian dualism, because the spiritual principle is not the same as our soul in our understanding. This self of the Sankhya school is beyond sense perception, is beyond memory, is beyond other psychic functions. It is only an unexplainable light, whereby the body and the whole world is moved. Well, in some sense it has some similarities with the higher soul in Platonism. Well, but there were some other kinds of dualisms. Some of them more similar to our dualism of the soul and body. And they had to explain the mechanism of reincarnation, because that means reincarnation, the soul has to have some connections with the body. It cannot be such transcendent principle. Yes, and there was also dualism, but by the one founder of the Vedantic school, Madhava, who lived in the 14th century. Very similar to ours, because yes, the Ishvara, which was identified as Vishnu, was the master of both souls and bodies. And it is really similar to our average mind-body dualism. Yeah.
Any questions, any comments?
I can fire one.
Okay.
I'm just trying to bring it up to today, and I'll just bring in some other material here. There's a sociologist, I don't remember her name, I think Erickson or something, have done extensive studies, empirical studies on scientists' attitude towards the science and religion debate. And she discovered that in India today, they are exceptional in the sense that most scientists reject the conflict view, think science and religion are compatible, even in harmony. So the kind of conflict pattern you find in the West is not present at all in India today. Would that be, given what you're saying here, that might not be surprising, but how would you kind of interpret that? That's why I'm getting on this, I'm sorry, but is there any reason to why that should surprise somebody that knows the philosophical roots of the Indian traditions?
Yes, India has rich traditions of science, including mathematical astronomy.
I mean, another way of reading it is atheism is not so much present. That's another way of reading what I'm saying, that atheism today isn't so much present.
No, they developed highest computer technologies. There are many physicists. One of them, if I'm not mistaken, was also a collaborator of Shokhin himself. Yes, there was openness for Western science. Yes. Okay.
I'm not an idealist at all, and I just some small thing from the video.
Yes, you are a Slavophiles.
But yes, I know. But in some texts of ancient Indian tradition, there is a big place for skepticism. And a good example is in the Song of Creation in the Rig Veda. You find that even the one who looks down on the creation doesn't know if the world has been created or not. My question is, on the problem of duality, mind-body dualism, is there this escape way of skepticism? A good way of making compatible every ontology of mind and body is to say, well, we do that.
Is it compatible with skepticism?
Is skepticism a strategy which has been used for the problem of mind-body? It has been used for the problem of creation. Is it used with the problem of duality?
Yes. As to Indian realities, I told about the lack of any atheist texts who could have pretended at any ancestry. But maybe in the medieval period there were some really skeptic texts which were mingled with texts of Indian naturalists. But it is not the same. I don't think that there could have been any alliance in India between skepticism and salvation of mind-body problem, because both positions of physicalism and dualism were utterly dogmatic. And where we have dogmatic doctrines, there is no room for skepticism. I think so.
So, is more questions, remarks, comments? Then, question? No. Thank you so much. And we close our section. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you for organizing this.
Some announcements.
I work on philosophy of religion that I began to forget it.
How do we meet these? There are some announcements. Sorry for interrupting. So, our foreign participants, tomorrow, please bring with you your passports and migration cards, because I need to make copies of your visa and migration card for our Department of Foreign Affairs, because it proves the proper work or something, I don't know, so it's of highly importance. And tomorrow early morning, Bogdan is leaving us to St. Petersburg, to his home, because he has some important exams in his PhD course. So let's wish him luck.
Yes.
Thank you.
And tomorrow, as today, we start at 11 o'clock, and we are waiting for you at 10:50, perhaps here, to take some coffee, perhaps, if you wish. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
I have a question. Are we going somewhere right now, or together?
Let's decide it out of this room.
Thank you.
I posted our time
But I prefer it when it's not.
It was a great pleasure to meet you.
Yeah.
Сейчас надо собраться, потом... Мы можем обсудить да, завтра у нас... Да. Завтра... Начинается с двора.
Thanks for the information.
I don't think there's too much view to good me. I think it's for us.
Sie haben aber auch